welcome everybody. Really great to have you all here. I will introduce myself and the aims of the session and how it's going to work properly in just a few minutes' time. We may get a couple more people joining. I'm just going to launch our polls first of all, which is a nice way just to get a little bit of an idea about your backgrounds and what you might be particularly interested in. So you should have pop up 3 multiple choice questions, which are also on the slide on the screen for you to answer. And the final question on the slide, what psychology topic do you most enjoy teaching and why? Could you have a go at answering that in the chat? Thank you. Very good. So we've already got responses to the polls from 12 people, I think. And then have a go at opening up the chat window, which, as Moses said, you can use to ask a question or ask for technical support at any point during the training. We will have a Q&A at the end of this session, when if you'd like to unmute and ask your question over your microphone, that would be great. Or you can just continue to ask questions in the chat. But up until that point, if you keep muted in the interest of getting through the presentation, that'd be great. And I'll just wait another minute or two and hopefully we'll get a couple of your responses in the chat on favorite topics. Thank you, Panayota. So it's good to see that we've got a good range of levels of experience. The modal response is that people have just started teaching the course, so it's great to have you here. I think this might be particularly useful if you're a newer teacher to the course. But if you're one of the more experienced teachers, then I'm hoping it will also be useful. There'll be perhaps a few tips and pieces of useful information, and if nothing else, this session might just reassure you that you are all set for the year ahead, and that you know everything that you need to. Most of you have got psychology degrees, but if you don't, you're very welcome. You're not alone by any means. There's increasing numbers of people, because it's such a popular subject, teaching psychology, who are relatively new to it from other backgrounds. And we have quite a few of you with examiner experience, which is, of course, a great way to really get to know how these courses are examined, and excellent training. Good range of topics, thank you, in your favorite topics: biological, cognitive, social. And yes, that developmental one, some really useful skills to apply in life. Great, thank you very much for your input there, really interesting to see. So let me start properly then with our presentation. I'll just end that poll. Oh, I'll share the results with you, so you should be able to see the results to the poll. So welcome to this training. Very quick background to it, because it's the first time that, at least in recent years, that we've offered this type of training. We do it for quite a few different subjects. My colleagues who are subject advisors in different subject areas, most of them do some kind of start of year training called All Set for the Year, or Getting Set for the Year Ahead. And we haven't in psychology had this recently, because I'm quite part-time in this role, and I've been involved in delivering exam feedback training for GCSE and A-level psychology, but this year I'm not, so I've had a bit more capacity. So my role as subject advisor is to be the sort of first point of contact for teachers who have questions about understanding the specification, how the exams work, how to deliver certain aspects of the course. So you can contact me by email at teachingpsychology@pearson.com. You can book a Teams call with me. You can ask questions for me on our new official Facebook group, which I'll share a link to later. And you can actually find a link to it if you've managed to download the slides in one of the very last slides that has my photo on as well. So that Facebook group is a good opportunity to get in touch. So what we're doing today is looking quickly at the specification changes, which you may be aware of, and just checking that you are all across those. Key support materials that are available, future training events, frequently asked questions, and then any other questions that you would like to ask at the end. If you attended the GCSE version of this event on Monday, then it's great to have you back. You will find that some of the information is basically repeated here. For example, the new Pearson branding, the results roundup, getting the most out of Exam Wizard. Those 3 points on my agenda will basically be the same if you came for the GCSE psychology session. However, the other bits are going to be either completely different or somewhat different. So it might be that you want to dip in and out. We will make a recording of this event available on YouTube. Should be up there in the next couple of weeks. But I'll ask Moses to stop the recording after I've got to the end of the formal bit of the presentation before we go into the Q&A, so that if you do want to come on the microphone and ask a question, you won't actually be part of the YouTube video. Okay, and I'm going to go quite quickly through this presentation, because although there's quite a lot I want to cover, I'm expecting that the majority of you will be quite familiar with most of this. So the slides, as Moses has explained, you can download through the resources link, or if you check your email, they should have been emailed to you yesterday. So I'm hoping that you can kind of go back through the slides and make sense of anything that I go through, if I go through it a bit quickly, or just ask a question in the chat and I can come back to it and explain it in a bit more detail at the end. So new Pearson branding, just I've got a very quick mention. We're kind of rolling it out. This is the new Pearson logo at the top of this slide. It takes time to implement these kind of big rebrands. So you'll continue to see a lot of things that have the old Pearson logo on with the kind of question mark P. So just to be aware that it's the same company, still Pearson EdXL, but we're just changing the look of the brand. So I'm going to talk about these changes. I'll pause at the end of this section and all the sections and have a look in the chat box to see if anyone's asked a question there. And yes, we'll then move on. So we announced these changes back in November of last year, so about 10 months ago, but it's the January 2026 exams which they'll actually take effect for. So the last exam series in May and June of this year was still based on the previous version of the specification, which was issue 5. So if you open up issue 6, which is the default version that you'll find on the qualification web page, then one of the very first pages is this summary of changes. Now, it looks quite long, but most of the changes here are fairly subtle changes to wording. For example, saying all topic areas when it's making it clear for synoptic questions on the exams that candidates can use ideas, concepts, theories from any of the other topics. And the intention with that wording is just to make it a little bit clearer that there will be some questions which are synoptic, especially on units 3 and 4, and candidates are free to use ideas from anything they've studied to answer those questions. The key changes that are important that will lead to slightly different styles of question being asked are one for the psychodynamic approach and one for a single question on developmental. So here's the new wording on psychodynamic. The reason for this change is that in certain regions of the world, there are some cultural issues that have made teaching the previous specification point, which mentions psychosexual stages, complicated for teachers. And teachers asked if there was a way that we could remove that specification point. The solution that has been put into this version of the specification is to offer some optionality here. So if you are happy teaching Freud's psychosexual stages theory, you don't need to make any change at all to the way you're teaching. The therapies bullet point 4.16 there has not changed. That's exactly the same as it was before. All we've done is for 4.14, you have the option of teaching the object relations school of thought, which is a slightly more modern kind of version of the theory with a bit less of a emphasis on unconscious sexual drives and so on, as an alternative to Freud. And the way that will look in an exam is shown in the updated sample assessment materials, the specimen papers. So you can find those on the qualification webpage by going to specification and sample assessments. And then it's that sample assessment materials link. And the question looks like this. So it says, you will have learned about one of the following theories. So you don't need to teach them both in detail. Obviously, you need to teach something about both of them for the therapies. But in terms of the explanations of development, you teach one of these. The question reminds students of this fact and says, in either Freud's theory or object relations, describe the main features. So that's the kind of question that will be asked on the psychodynamic approach in future. The other change relates to this part of the kind of assessment guidance for Unit 3 and the developmental topic. So previously, there was always an 8-mark question which had a synoptic element to it. And if you go back and look at the previous version of the specification, it basically said that it would either be on something to do with ethical issues or to do with the status of psychological research as being scientific, or the strengths and weaknesses of psychological research. But all of those said, drawing on material from units 1 and 2. Now that was not very clear. Was the feedback that we had. It also meant that it was quite difficult for examiners to come up with new ways to ask that 8-mark question, and that led to a question the year before this one, back in 2024, which required detailed knowledge of a particular study from, I think it was from Unit 2. The feedback from teachers, probably from some of you, was that that wasn't particularly fair. It required students to basically revise too much detail from units 1 and 2, just in case that kind of question came up, hence this change. So what they need to now do is be aware of the full list of issues and debates, which used to just be for unit 4, for that 8-mark question on unit 3. Now that does mean that you have to adjust the order that you teach in year 13, in the final year of the course, to make sure that your students are familiar with all these debates and how they might apply to developmental psychology. If that is difficult in your context with the amount of teaching time you have, then one thing to just bear in mind is that you could not enter your students for Unit 3 in January. You could hold that entry off and enter them for both Units 3 and 4 in the summer. I think lots of schools feel that they can deliver this, and it's still beneficial to break the exams up in that way, but you do have that choice. And I'll come back to this change a little bit later when I talk about resources that are available, because we do have exemplar questions and responses to the new type of 8-mark question that will be asked, including 8 out of 8 responses, which are really useful to look at to understand how that one will be assessed. But that's in my resources section. So I'll just pause there for a second for a drink of water and just to see if anyone has a question they want to ask in the chat. which we don't have yet. But feel free to ask one now. I'll come back to it at the end of the next section, or you can save your questions for the final part of our session. For the GCSE one, I managed to finish the presentation 40 minutes in. I think this one I might need 45 because there's actually a few more bits of information to share, but we should have at least 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Okay, so my next section is about analysing your students' results, supporting students to understand results from last year. If you go to the news page on the website, if you've not found that, if you go to the International A-Level Psychology edXL page where you can download the specification and find my contact details, at the top there's this news link that I've highlighted here, and you can find all the previous subject updates. I write one of these every month for psychology. If there's any new resources or news about changes or training opportunities or recordings of training or YouTube videos aimed at students, I'll always advertise them there. And you can sign up for an update email to make sure that you never miss an update. But they should also be published generally in the first week of each month. So the September one you can see was published on the 7th of September. I'm highlighting this because the August one, which is called the Results Support for Psychology Qualifications, that has a long list of expandable headings, which if you've got any questions outstanding about access to scripts, for example, which allows you to view your students' answers and the marks they were awarded, or understanding how to get into Results Plus, or understanding the UMS. So I made a video back in the summer kind of explaining the uniform mark scale and how that works alongside raw marks to calculate students' grades. So you can find links to all those things through that news update from August. Results Plus, if you've not already used it, is a really powerful tool for analysing your students' results. It allows you to see the average mark that your students got on every question and compare that with the edXL average, for example. So it can be really useful to look at this time of year, just to identify any topics that you might want to kind of look closely at your resources for, perhaps give a little bit more time to, if your students haven't done so well on. So once you've logged in with your edXL online login, that's the same login that you would use to access Exam Wizard, which I'll mention later, also to download the locked exam papers from the last 12 months from the website, and which your exams officer can set up for you if you don't already have one. You then choose the subject and go into this page, and you then get cohort results option and download results. Those are the two I'm going to look about. Download results I'll come back to later. Cohort results then leads to these other two options, the cohort paper analysis or the grade reports. Sorry, then you choose the subject. So you choose international A levels, you choose the series, so June 2025 to look at this year's results, and then you scroll down until you find psychology. You've got the AS and the international A level there. Then you get this grade report, which shows you how your students' grades compared with all edXL students for the qualification. You can then go into the paper analysis. The links I've highlighted at the top here, the first one, analysis, shows you this view where you can see how your students performed on each question. But we just take this first one, for example, it's all amber and red because that was a lower performing question for your students. But so it was for all edXL students. And in fact, for this centre, although they didn't score very highly on that question, the students performed better on average on 1A than they did than all edXL students did on average. That's what the positive variance means. Whereas on question 1B, they actually performed a bit less well than the edXL average. So that's the useful thing that you can do. Exam documents at the top here allows you to download not only the paper, but also the mark scheme and the examiner reports. You can export in the top right, and that allows you to kind of pull this data out into Excel. Something that I did before I screenshotted this is add a formula in that column that says skill ID. That was actually a blank column on this spreadsheet. So I added a formula that basically does the same thing that that variance column on the previous screen shows you, like how have your students done differently to the Edexcel average. But the fact you can then do this for every question, and then you can rank your spreadsheet, can be quite useful. So if you would like perhaps a short video that explains how to do that in Excel, then just let me know in the chat, and that's something that I can produce. If you go to download results, before you go into cohort results, you can download a different spreadsheet from Results Plus, and this shows you the mark of each one of your students. Here for this center, I've just replaced the student names with X's and their candidate numbers, but you can then sort this spreadsheet from highest to lowest overall score if you change the sort options to horizontal sorting. And that can be very useful, I think, because it can allow you to quickly find where some of your students have performed very well on certain questions, like getting 9 out of 12 or 14 out of 16. And then you might want to access their scripts and have a look at what they wrote and use those in your teaching of your new students. So that's just a quick whiz through useful things that you can find out from Results Plus. I'll just have another quick pause to look in the chat. Okay, no questions there yet. So hopefully that's because I'm anticipating and answering all of your questions, but do please ask anything that occurs to you. I'm sure you won't be the only person with a question if you have one. So let's have a quick look at teaching and learning resources on the website. These are all free resources. I will say before I go further that hopefully you are well aware that we have textbooks available now for year 1 and year 2 of this course. They were published almost a year ago, so they're still quite new. I'm not here to promote them. I will just say that they have been well received, but they have prompted a couple of interesting questions, which is the textbook kind of written for this new version of the specification that I've mentioned? If a study isn't in the textbook, does that mean it's come out of the specification? So the answers to those questions are that yes, the books have been written with the knowledge of the change that's been made, but the specification and the other resources that are available for free on the website should still be your main source to check what you need to teach students. So for example, for the IAS units, there's a couple of the optional studies which aren't in the book. That was a decision taken by the book authors, just with limited sort of space and time. Just they wanted to focus more on the other optional studies. But that's not a change to the specification. Those other optional studies are still there, and if you like teaching them and you've got good resources, then please carry on doing so. So use these resources on the website as a teacher, your main guide. Of course, use the textbook for students, and yeah, make full use of that, but check the specification if in doubt. So if you go to teaching and learning materials under the course materials link, or you can also access course materials at the top there, you then get a lot of different types of document that pop up, lots of different sources available to you. We haven't put many new things on for IAL Psychology yet, but I will just mention that on the UK A-level website, we have maths support documents and some new resources under that worksheets and resources heading, which it might be worth having a look at, because the maths requirements are virtually identical for the international and the UK. We do plan to make IAL Psychology examples and put them on that website. It's just taking a little bit more time to get those edited. The only real difference to be aware of when it comes to maths is that you only have 3 stats tests to teach your students, whereas there's a 4th one, which is the Mann-Whitney test in the UK A level. Really, everything else about the maths is the same. So those maths worksheets might be worth a look. And the other resources, they use current research from the British Psychological Society Research Digest blog, and they have example questions and examiner commentary. And as long as you pick a topic like schizophrenia, which is in both A-level specifications, those are equally relevant for international A-level because the exam questions are so similar. So there's an example of the maths and psychology. There's a worksheet on choosing stats tests, which as long as you tell your students not to worry about the Mann-Whitney, you could use. And there's a little screenshot there and an example of some of the topics that we've got those new worksheets for the UK A level. So it is worth having a look at those. Back to international A level dedicated resources. These are not new, but I will just mention them to make sure you are aware of them. We've got a component guide for each unit and a summary of studies booklet for each unit. Now, the examiners will not be looking at the textbook when they write future exam questions and mark schemes, but they do refer to these 3 guides. They're not really student-friendly documents. They're very detailed. They have undergone some improvements in the last year. You can see the dates there are all from December last year. That's because we identified a few errors and inconsistencies in them, so they are improved versions. So download them afresh if you've downloaded them more than a year ago. And they are extremely useful because they go into a lot of detail aimed at teachers to make sure that you really understand the theories and the studies that are listed in the specification. Oh, I also mentioned in the heading of this slide a taxonomy table document, which we're just in the process of giving a quick update to, but that is a really helpful guide to the different exam question command words that are used and the assessment objectives that go with them. Exemplar material is, I think, extremely useful for 2 purposes. One, to help you as teachers accurately mark your students' work for mock exams and other kinds of exam practice they do. But secondly, it's really useful to actually use in the classroom and show to students and get them to look at example responses and the mark scheme and criticize the responses and say how many marks they would give and then show them the examiner commentary. It can really help students to think like an examiner and understand how they can be successful in exams. So you can find these if you go to exam materials. As I'm sure most of you know, our examiner reports from the summer series, from the June series, feature example answers to the questions with commentaries explaining how many marks were awarded. We also have under exemplar material some new material from just under a year ago, particularly for Unit 3 because of the change to that 8-mark question. So it's worth looking there. Here's an example of a new style question that could be asked in Unit 3. An 8-marker, assess whether reductionism could be considered beneficial in developmental psychology. So an example of one of the issues and debates from the long list that could now be applied in developmental. And the answer to that question in this new exemplar pack is an 8 out of 8 response, which is something that teachers often ask us for. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Okay, we're doing quite well getting through the formal part of the presentation. So I'll press on with Exam Wizard, very similar to how I presented this in my GCSE session earlier in the week. It's a very useful resource. If you've not yet explored it, it's worth doing so. It has not had international A-level psychology loaded into it until really quite recently. Doesn't have all the papers in now, but the most recent papers, about 4 years worth, are now available in Exam Wizard. If you've used it for GCSE psychology or A-level, you'll know how helpful it can be. So the address of it, examwizard.co.uk, is there on this slide. You choose psychology. You then log in with your Edexcel online login. You can find past papers. There's a link at the top there. Those are the same papers that are available on the qualification website, but it's a slightly easier way to search them and download them. More important, I think, is this build a paper tool. You choose international advanced level. Then if you click here next to topic in my other yellow box, you can basically expand each heading in the specification, and you can check boxes within that to kind of zoom in on different topic areas. For example, if you just want to give your students some practice exam questions for homework, or if you want to do an end of topic test, you can build one that way. You can also filter by math skills, for example, and then search. If when you search you don't find any questions, it's worth clicking the clear button, and then you have to choose international advanced level again and basically start your search over. But that can help, because sometimes we found that internet browsers can basically remember previous searches, and then if you type in a keyword, for example, even if that keyword is then blank later on, it might remember the keyword you entered last week when you last used this tool. So hitting the clear button can just remove that problem. It deletes any saved data. Here's an example of how you can drill down, for example, to just find some questions on learning theories. And then when you click search, you'll get a list of questions that appear in this box. If you click view, it will show you the question here. You can look at the mark scheme, the examiner report. If you add, then it adds it to a list of questions, which you can get a summary of in this light blue box towards the top of the screen. And when you click export paper, you can choose to export it as either a PDF or a Word document with the mark scheme, with the examiner reports if you want. So it's a very, very useful free resource. You don't have to pay any extra for it. That is available to all teachers at Edexcel centres. This next section is short, so I'll just do that as well before I check in case you've asked a question in the chat. Future training opportunities will be all available through pdacademy.pearson.com. So this is the place to look. You can filter to international secondary schools, and then to psychology, into Key Stage 5. At the moment, at least when I checked earlier in the week, it was only this training that was available on there. There will be exam feedback training coming up in November. I think it will be a pre-recorded event rather than a live one like this. That's what we did last year. It gives teachers a bit more flexibility because it's less interactive than this event, to just to watch it whenever is convenient for them, wherever they are in the world. But you'll be able to access it through this site, along with any other training that we run later in the year. But I will also advertise those through my subject updates. Okay, I'll just pause there for a second. I don't think any questions have come through on the chat. If I'm missing anything, if you have asked one and I'm just not seeing it, then feel free to unmute and let me know. Actually, let me ask you a question which I would like you to just pop in the chat. Something I excuse me, I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about the new specification. I was going to just answer a frequently asked question that we've had in the last few months from international A-level teachers about the timing of exams. So we announced back at the beginning of July that for our UK A-level exams, there's going to be an extra 15 minutes for all candidates. for paper 1 and paper 2 from next summer, from May, June 2026. And this is in response to feedback from teachers and in particular to a bit of a formal consultation we did about a year ago, asking them whether they wanted this, whether they felt that it would allow their students to demonstrate their knowledge better. And the response was very strongly that yes, even though we are all conscious that we want to kind of reduce the burden of exams on students to allow them to show their knowledge, teachers for the UK A-level felt that that extra 15 minutes was a good thing. Now, the change has not been made for either GCSE or international A-level yet, but for both of those qualifications, we're a bit earlier in the journey, but we've started to look at that possibility. So can I just ask you to put in the chat, would you vote for that in a formal consultation, which this isn't, but if we were to do one, would you want an extra 15 minutes for some of the papers, all of the papers? So if you could just answer either all papers or for GCSE as well, feel free to answer. Thank you, Hannah. But for international A level, would you argue for 15 minutes for all papers or just some papers? Thank you for those responses. Keep them coming through, and I will take those and pass them on to colleagues. Thank you, Suhashini, for asking a question. Can Sri Lankan teachers also access the UK A-level page? Yes, those resources that I mentioned they're publicly available to anyone anywhere in the world. The UK A-level is available to international centres as well, but almost all choose to do the international A-level because it's modular. There's quite a lot of similarity between them in terms of how they're assessed. There are some key differences in terms of the content. Yeah, thank you very much for your responses to that extra time. The IAL paper has not been extended yet. Thank you for that question. So the timings remain the same for international A-level at the moment. It's just the UK A-level that's been changed so far. Yeah, I will take that feedback to colleagues, and as soon as we have anything to announce, we'll let you know. There'll definitely be quite a long lead-in time to any change. So we've given almost a year's notice for the UK A-level, and I anticipate it would be similar for the international. Okay, let me move on with frequently asked questions, but please do put more questions or feedback in the chat as we go. So here's an interesting question. Will students who are doing resits, so who've already sat, let's say, Unit 2 last academic year, if they're resitting in January, will their resit exam be based on the previous or the updated version of the specification? Now, the changes are fairly subtle. This is not a whole new specification. It still has 2015 as its year because that's the year it was introduced. This is just an amendment. It's actually issue 6. So it's a part of a sort of chain of small updates. And that means that there are no exams available based on the previous version. All the exams have changed, including for resitters, but only with those subtle changes. So of course, if for Unit 2 you've taught Freud's theory, students can continue to use that because they'll just have that option. But perhaps it makes a bigger difference for anyone resitting Unit 3 because they will need to know the issues and debates for that 8-mark question. So this one I think I've already answered. Forgive me, I forgot I had a slide for it. So yeah, the textbooks are written for the new specification. But if you're unclear about anything in there which seems to be different from, as long as you're looking at the issue 6 of the specification, that is the absolute definitive guide to what students need to know and can refer to. For example, for those option topics which aren't option studies which aren't all in the book, you can still teach them because they're in the specification. Now, when it comes to marking essays, we get quite a lot of questions about these. Very similar for the UK and the international A levels. Because there are 4 points for AO1 and 4 points for AO3 on the mark scheme, teachers often ask, well, does that mean that they need to make 4 points? The answer is no, because these are what we call indicative content. They are to give an indication or an example of the sorts of thing that would gain marks. And the policy our mark schemes follow is always to have 4 points when there are 4 marks available. That suggests that the marking is based on points, like it is for a 2-mark question or a 4-mark question. But instead, the mark is actually awarded using the levels-based mark scheme. And it can be better, in fact, to have fewer points, but expanded on in more detail. So the key to understanding levels-based marking is to do the exam feedback training. There's a recording available for last year's now, if you want to look at that before you do any more marking, to look at the exemplars that I've already mentioned and see how those have been marked. Do essays need a conclusion is another common question. You'll see in those level-based mark schemes that for assess and evaluate, and to what extent questions, where there's AO3, it mentions conclusions from level 2 upwards. So they are very important, but they don't need to come at the end in a separate paragraph. So our examiners are very clear. They can be mini conclusions, which come at the end of each paragraph in a single sentence. The important thing is that students, when they're answering these questions, they're reaching a conclusion as they write. And it could be a good idea to write a separate concluding paragraph, but they don't need to do that repeating what they've already written, as long as they've included the conclusions as they go. Discuss is different. It does not require conclusions because it's for AO1 and AO2 questions. And one final point on this slide, which I've actually just been discussing with a number of my colleagues, is that it's really important that students understand that all of these styles of question, these 8 markers, 12 markers, and so on, the longer questions, they always have a significant number of AO1 marks, which are for knowledge and understanding. So when the question says evaluate, before they get onto the evaluation, students need to summarize the knowledge that they have of that topic. And in fact, for an 8-mark question, that is always half the marks. So it's really important that half of their answer is focused on the AO1, which is the knowledge and the understanding for all of those questions. Should they do the AO1 and AO3 separate, like the lower example here, with the AO1 is shown in blue and the AO3 in yellow, or should they integrate it, which means that each paragraph has some AO1 and some AO3? The answer is either is perfectly good, and it comes down to the personal preference of students or teachers. A good thing about the separate style is it can help them to check that they're writing the right balance between the two skills. The other integrated style, where they're combining it, can make it easier for them to link ideas together to create logical chains of reasoning, which are mentioned in the mark scheme, which basically means that they're connecting ideas. So both have advantages, and it's really your judgment as to which you want to encourage your students to use. Okay, I've almost finished my FAQs. We're quite close to the end of the presentation. Do answers need to match the mark scheme exactly? So the key point here is that mark schemes say look for other reasonable marking points. And so what's given here is just an example, one way to answer the question and get full marks. If you think when you look at your own student scripts in script viewer that maybe they haven't been given credit for what was an accurate answer, then our strong advice is to use the review of marking and moderation service details in my August update, which I mentioned earlier, and get the marking checked. For non-specialist teachers who would like help with any aspect of the subject content, then do get in touch with me, and I'd be very happy to either produce some new training materials or talk to teachers individually about the subject content. That's part of my role. Use the topic guides, which I mentioned earlier, and the exemplar material as both really good ways to understand how examiners are thinking about the subject content and what students need to understand about it. And any kind of ideas you have for support that you would like, for example, videos I can make explaining complex bits of the specification or aspects of exam technique, then you can let me know in the chat now, or you can email in teachingpsychology@pearson.com. So I'm going to return to this any questions slide in a couple of minutes after the recording has been stopped, but we're just going to do the final little bit of my presentation first. So to summarize, I'm so sorry, I've not updated this slide, so I'm gonna move straight on from there because it mentioned the timing changes for the A level. So we didn't talk about timing changes except to confirm that there have been none yet, and you have expressed your views on that in the chat. Thank you. We did talk about specification changes, which that slide should have said, which are coming into effect for January exams. We've looked at the free resources that are available, results support, and how to get the most out of Results Plus and Exam Wizard, along with the frequently asked questions I've just gone through. So just to round off then, support available to you. There's the email address to get in touch with me, the phone line between those times, UK time, to talk to one of our teaching services team who can often help you immediately with questions or refer them to me if they need to. There's the sign up link for subject advisor updates, the link to book an appointment with me on Teams, a link to our Facebook page, which I'd really encourage you to join and connect with other teachers and ask me questions that way. Exam Wizard Results Plus access to scripts. We have links to those there on that slide if you'd like to look into those in more detail, and to the Professional Development Academy, which is where you can find the links to future training. So you have all those in the slides to this presentation. Thank you very much. That's the end of the formal part of this presentation.